I've always considered myself a gamer. From a very young age, I played just about any game I could get my hands on that sparked my interest. I played platformers, shooters, puzzle games, horror games, fighting games, RPGs, RTSs, point-and-click games, and whatever else looked like it would take me on a journey. For me, it was all about getting out of my own head and into someone else's, leaving my world and troubles behind so I could conquer someone else's. But the attachment often stopped the moment I saved my game and turned it off. I was abruptly tugged back into reality and promptly placed back in my own shoes. Aside from some decent hand-eye coordination and improved reaction time, I rarely took anything away from the games I played other than cool stories about glitches or difficult boss fights. Who I was and the games I played were always separated by a very thick dose of realism. That changed in April of 2007. My friend Ian stopped by with a new set of games in hand, the first of which was Digital Devil Saga, a game that I would liken to the Dark Souls of JRPGs if you don't mind me using that outdated comparison. While I liked what I saw and played, it didn't really appeal to me from an artistic perspective. Digital Devil Saga carries the art style typically associated with the standard Shin Megami Tensei game, and for me, it was incredibly jarring. I've grown pretty fond of it over the years, but in that moment, I didn't particularly care for it. I think you could see I wasn't as into it as he was, and that's when Ian popped in a game that changed how I approached games to this day. That game was Persona 3. There was something magical about it, something unique that resonated with me so deeply that I can't help but compare games I've played to the Persona franchise. In this video, I'll be exploring the ins and outs of what makes these games so special to me, so please be warned, there will be spoilers. If you haven't played Persona 3 through 5, I highly recommend you do that and then return here later. We'll be diving into the history of triumph it's had in the gaming industry, as well as the legacy of hope Persona has left me with personally. Persona 3 released in July of 2006 to pretty universal praise, receiving respectable scores from outlets such as Metacritic, Game Informer, and IGN. It even won a few Game of the Year awards from a handful of places back when that title wasn't so arbitrary. The impressive artwork came at a time when Western audiences were consuming more and more anime content at a higher and higher rate. And there was no shortage of RPGs in 2006 either, boasting titles such as .hack GU Volumes 1 and 2, Dirge of Cerberus Final Fantasy VII, Disgaea 2, Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion, Phantasy Star Universe, and even Pokemon Diamond and Pearl. Needless to say, gamers had their hands full, and I was no exception. To briefly summarize the plot, Persona 3 places you in the shoes of a silent protagonist transferring to Gekkoukan High School, where you soon discover you have the ability to wield what is called a persona. For the sake of an example, having a persona is like having a big old ghost Pokemon you summon in battle. You're asked to join SEAS, the Specialized Extracurricular Execution Squad, basically like a group of junior Ghostbusters, and subsequently elected leader due to your unique ability to summon multiple personas in battle. Occurring between one day and the next is a moment in time known as the Dark Hour. During this period, your high school turns into Tartarus, a giant tower that you and your friends explore when you have time. For better or for worse, the goal of your organization is to make it to the top of Tartarus while investigating the mysteries of the Dark Hour and uncovering its many secrets along the way. On paper, it sounds pretty generic and simple, but once I dove into the game, I was met with so much more. Persona 3 wasn't the average RPG by any stretch of the imagination. Sure, it had its elements that were familiar to the genre like leveling up, equipping gear for battle, resource management, even turn-based combat. But there were so many other elements built on top of these simple mechanics. There were two completely distinct sides to the game. There was the typical dungeon crawling, beat the bad guys, get stronger, the world's on fire side. And to my complete surprise, there was what I can only summarize as the high school simulator. I suddenly had grades to worry about and exams to study for. I'd be playing through a day and be asked an actual academic question in class. I learned a lot of interesting but ultimately useless information, and it kept me on my toes. I could explore town, I could meet new people, etc. Additionally, I found myself worrying about my academics, charm, and courage, 3 attributes that can open up brand new opportunities or gate them off entirely if I didn't put in the effort to improve them. It was also familiar. When I initially started the game, I was a little put off by the protagonist having next to no dialogue, with all of your available options laid out to you in the form of dialogue options. I was so accustomed to simply being a passenger in someone else's digital life that my first hour or two felt strangely hollow. But that was only because I still felt like I was living someone else's life, not like the character's avatar was a surrogate for me. Once it clicked in my head that this was my story, the flow of the game changed entirely for me. I suddenly became more aware of how the other characters reacted to me and placed more weight on my dialogue choices. It was as if I was suddenly considering the feelings of actual people, because I was. Persona 3 was my first introduction to the social link mechanic. Social links are the bonds you form with specific NPCs over the course of the game, with each social link being tied to a particular major arcana. Your party members are included in the list of characters with social links available. Like with any friendship, nurturing these bonds takes time and commitment, but your attributes must also be at certain levels for some people to even give you the time of day. Mitsuru. You have to regularly choose to spend time with these people in order to grow closer to them. Working on each link not only nets you a new friend, but also comes with its own miniature story arc as you get to know them. Art imitates life even further though, since ignoring your friends will temporarily cause these social links to close themselves off to you until you can get back into that person's good graces. That mechanic can definitely screw you if it happens at an inopportune time, but it happened so infrequently to me that I was mostly just annoyed with my own failure to manage my time properly when it did. Aside from just being a mechanic in the life simulator portion of the game, social links served a very direct purpose in the dungeon crawling side. The level of your bonds directly influenced how strong your personas could get. A social link that is maxed out will undeniably produce stronger persona at a faster rate than one that is sitting at the halfway point, and especially one that's still at its base level. On top of that, the protagonist has an additional ability that allows him to fuse persona together in order to make new ones, and the ranks of your social links grant bonuses based on their respective arcana. It's a built-in incentive program that encourages you to explore the relationships available to you, which I found to be incredibly well executed. Exploring those relationships had weight to it. What you do and say can either push the friendship forward or stop it dead in its tracks. That sense of, what will this person think of me if I behave this way, set in any time it was my turn to speak, and until then, I'd never really cared about how I was perceived by video game characters. Not even in a game like Oblivion that has so much dialogue, it's a wonder anyone sat down and wrote it all, made me feel so bafflingly aware of the people around me and their emotions. I was perfectly content saying terrible things, stealing random items, and just generally being a dick in a world I was supposed to save. Persona bridged that empathy gap I'd so often held for fictional characters. I couldn't bring myself to upset, harm, or even be mean to them because while I was knee-deep in Persona 3, I was one of them. Every day until I finished the game, I was obsessed with it. I was fixated on getting stronger, learning secrets, fighting new bosses, and being blindsided by new plot twists. I even remember skipping out on a graduation party I was invited to by upperclassmen because I wanted to finish the game. Everyone was out celebrating a new graduating class, welcoming in the summer break, but I was sitting in my room, controller in hand, standing atop Tartarus with my friends and preparing to defend the world one last time from annihilation. The final battle felt so much heavier to me than any other game I'd ever played up to that point, because there was an undercurrent of darkness from the moment I pressed New Game to the moment the credits rolled. Not only that, but I cared about this fictional world and the people I'd met within it. When I was done, I felt relieved, almost as though I had actually saved the world from some unfathomable force of nature. I thought my time with the students of Gekkoukan High School had come to an end, but that wasn't yet the case. We'll cycle back to this in a little bit. For now, let's jump ahead to 2008. In the summer of 2008, just before the beginning of my senior year of high school, I was struck in the head by a gift from the heavens above in the form of Persona 4. Much like its predecessor, P4 was met with critical acclaim from numerous sources, often ranking higher than Persona 3. It leaned heavily on the foundation laid by Persona 3, but changed just enough to please pretty much everyone. I don't know if you've been living under a rock, but the game accumulated an immense fanbase that eventually led to a spin-off game, or two, or more. At the time of the game's launch, I had so much on my plate at the time, preparing for my final year of high school, looking at colleges, balancing my social life, and so on. I hadn't even noticed that there was a fourth game in development, or that it was slated to even be released. I remembered the joy and heartache that the previous entry had filled me with, and I dove right in. Persona 4 follows the same template as its predecessor and plops you right in the shoes of another voiceless, but stylish, Japanese transfer student. With your parents going on a year-long business trip, you're sent to live with your uncle and cousin in the small town of Inaba. Almost immediately after your arrival, a series of grisly murders puts the entire town on edge, and whispers of a mysterious television broadcast that only airs on rainy nights, later identified as the Midnight Channel, crops up among the student body. It isn't long before you and your friends awaken to Persona and discover there's a link between the murders and the Midnight Channel. It's up to you to track down and face the killer before the year ends, with plenty of twists and turns along the way to keep you guessing. Throw in some high school socializing, 2 more attributes to work on, and the expected dungeon crawling, and bada bing bada boom, you got yourself a brand new Persona game. The school year started the following week for me, and I quickly found myself struggling to decide between getting a full night's rest before classes, or inching just a bit further in whatever dungeon I was working through. With it being my senior year, I had even less time to spend on Persona 4 than I had been lucky enough to spend on Persona 3. My coursework got more difficult, I was trying to balance my first real relationship with time I wanted to spend with friends, I was in the drama club so I had plays to memorize, all while trying to squeeze in time for this game when I really should have been sleeping. It was during this year that I had taken more notice of the impeccable soundtrack that Persona 4 boasted. Since a copy of the soundtrack came with the game, I often had it playing on my computer or in my CD player while trying to get some studying done. Yeah, I said CD player. One of these bad boys. The tunes were so catchy, but never intrusive. I never found myself getting distracted from my work. Just the opposite. Having Persona music playing in the background made me concentrate even more because I suddenly felt like the protagonist of the game again, trying to keep my grades up in the same fashion I'd need to in the town of Inaba. I ended up doubling back to take another listen to the soundtrack for Persona 3 and fell in love with it all over again. For the longest period, those albums were all I listened to, taking a backseat only to Linkin Park. Don't at me. Persona 4 brandishes the same battle system as P3, but with a very important addition. You could finally assume control of your other party members in combat. It was a minor tweak that snuffed out one of the few real gripes I had about P3. I hated that party members would do what they wanted, and I had to hope and pray they did what I wanted. Persona 4 gives the player the option to make all the choices, or remain a singular entity, and leave things up to RNG. Don't know why you do that, but the option's there. I like having complete control over every aspect of my battle strategy, especially during boss fights, so I opted to take the reins. Shortly after Christmas, my Christmas, not their Christmas, it was time to face the culprit behind the murders in Inaba. I remembered being shocked by the reveal, and honestly feeling a little betrayed by a character I'd come to enjoy the presence of. And because I'd been envisioning myself in the place of the voiceless protagonist, the emotions I felt were real. They were my own. And those same emotions were shared by my party members, people I'd spent well over 150 plus hours with. I felt the kind of resolve reserved for real-world situations, and I was ready to fight. But once that fight was over, the game had another twist ready for me. A path to the true ending, which we'll talk about after we shine a light on our last title. Persona 5 came out in 2016 and had mighty big shoes to fill with the unprecedented success of Persona 4. Everyone expected big things from the 5th installment in the series, and according to gaming outlets, YouTubers, and word of mouth, that seems to be exactly what everyone got. Except me, because I didn't own a PS4. My personal lack of a Sony console aside, Persona 5 blew people away, grabbing fantastic scores from gaming outlets and snatching a slew of awards, including Best Role-Playing Game at the Game Awards 2017, Best RPG on IGN's Best of 2017 list, and 2 separate awards at the 2016 PlayStation Awards in Japan. The Gold Award, meaning it managed to sell over 500,000 copies in Japan and the rest of Asia between October 1st, 2015 and September 30th, 2016. It also picked up a User's Choice Award at that same event. The game was making noticeable waves in the RPG world, but for a long time, I had to watch from the outside while also avoiding spoilers. I didn't dive into Persona 5 until October of 2018. Trust me when I say any free moment I had was spent pouring through this brand new journey. There was more to see, there was more to do, and above all else, there was a brand new story and a new life for me to inherit. Just like both P3 and P4, Persona 5 zips you up in the skin of yet another transfer student that's surprisingly handsome compared to just about everyone else in town. Unlike his previous counterparts, this protagonist isn't in Tokyo because he chooses to be. After defending a woman that was clearly in need of a helping hand, our protagonist is slapped with assault charges, expelled from school, and relocated. His personal goal is to get through his probationary period without incident so that he can return home and not end up in a jail cell. Through the reckless self-righteousness of a teacher, though, his criminal history is made known, and before he even arrives, he's labeled a delinquent. Fast forward a bit, and you befriend others like you who are delinquents, quote-unquote, in their own way and become aware of an alternate reality known to you as the metaverse. You and your friends discover it's possible to change the hearts of terrible people from within the metaverse, causing their personalities to purge the twisted desires dwelling within them and confess to whatever misdeed or crime their desires have led them to. You and your friends take on the name of the Phantom Thieves and set off on a crusade to give courage to those in need and make irresponsible adults and criminals pay for their actions, reforming society for the better one heart at a time. Admittedly, I fell right into this game like a black hole. I fell behind on shows I watch, I fell behind on YouTubers I enjoy, I fell off the radar socially for a bit. I was locked in. Everything about Persona 5 was refreshing. It was like seeing an old friend again after a long time without hearing from them, only this time they've come with a serious glow up and are even more attractive than you remembered. It isn't surprising that Persona 5 was pretty highly praised on launch. If this was a review, I'd sing its praises too, but that isn't what this is. Once I finished the game, the same wave of nostalgia and slight sadness swept over me the way it had twice before. I was sad to see the game come to an end, and I had never asked myself why that was. Part of me always chalked it up to the fact I'd simply really enjoyed the experience and just wanted to spend more time in that universe. But that wasn't it. It was something deeper than that. There are a lot of people in the world that just don't understand the appeal of video games. They think it's a waste of time, it's childish, it's violence for the sake of violence, and so on. To those people, I would challenge them to sit down and play the Persona games and then try to tell me with a straight face that there was nothing to take away from the experience. Like I mentioned earlier, I was a high school student when I first got my hands on Persona 3, so I was in a prime position to relate to the world that was built for me and the themes presented. As a collective, the Persona games embody what it is and how it feels to be an awkward high school student. It hits all the right notes to allow your suspension of disbelief to kick in and immerse yourself in the role of the protagonist. Trying to balance your academic life, your love life, and your social life is one enormous mess in high school. When I got home each day and turned on my PS2, I still felt like myself while I was playing as the protagonist of Personas 3 and 4. The games gave me a kind of outlet for my own loneliness. I had friends in high school, sure, but not many. I was the introverted, quiet kid, and I kept my circle very tight-knit. Despite my lack of charisma, part of me longed to be well-liked by more people. To be perceived as a cool guy that everyone wanted to hang out with, to be considered charming by attractive members of the opposite sex, and to build bonds that went beyond the cycle of "I'll see you at school" that most friendships were stuck in. I wanted all of that, but I didn't know how to get to that point. Or maybe I was just too scared to try. The social links of Persona gave me an outlet for those desires. I was able to live vicariously through the protagonist, making new friends, being an eligible bachelor, getting the best grades in my class, having an incredible adventure where I was the only one that could stop the world from ending, all of it. That may sound pathetic to some, but the games gave me a way to vent all of the negative emotions and thoughts that had built up inside me. A video game helped me do that. Not a person or a professional, a piece of software. With those emotions purged from my system, I was open to bettering myself. I had started taking on the themes the game presented to me and figuring out how it applied to my life in a practical way. Persona 3 deals with themes of death and mortality, two things I honestly struggled with for most of my life. When I was younger, around 4th grade, I lost my brother Matthew. Up until that point, I'd been to funerals, sure, but I'd never been on the receiving end of "I'm sorry for your loss." It was a feeling I couldn't shake, that hole left behind in my life and the lives of my family. It hung over my family like a continuous rain cloud for years. Just as that cloud started to vanish, we lost my grandfather, one of the staples of my family. Again, the shockwaves that went through me and my family were indescribable. By the time I reached high school, not counting my brother and grandfather, I had attended so many funerals that I'd become numb to the events themselves, but I'd developed an unspeakable fear of death. I'd have miniature panic attacks anytime I thought about my own death and the pain that it would inflict on my loved ones. Then Persona 3 turned that fear on its head. Needless to say, the consistent theme of death made me uncharacteristically uncomfortable. So many characters die over the course of the game: Shinji, Chidori, Takeharu, and even the protagonist himself. It wasn't until about a year later, when I got to play an extension of the main story known as The Answer, did the theme of the game click into place for me. The Answer takes place soon after the conclusion of the main game, also known as The Journey. Not too far from the ending, there's a sequence where the surviving members of SEES face off against a powerful shadow that looks exactly like the protagonist, the friend they'd lost. This shadow version of the protagonist was a manifestation of their grief and their regret. Their inability to come to terms with their loss created this metaphorical darkness that wore the face of the deceased. It wasn't until they found their resolve that they were able to defeat the shadow and put that grief behind them enough to move forward. And like the last piece of a puzzle, it fell into place for me. I could see the bigger picture. I could see what the game's theme was really about. Not just death, but the acceptance of death. If you constantly fear death, it will keep you from doing the things you want in life, and you'll still fail to avoid its grasp in the end. If you spend your life pretending death isn't a factor, you could very well miss out on spending time with loved ones while they're still here, or while you are. It's only by accepting death as a part of life and treasuring each moment that you'll be able to fully and truly live and enjoy what life has to offer. The main character demonstrates this point by involving himself in the lives and hearts of so many people, giving him the opportunity to experience so many different aspects of life socially and emotionally. It was those experiences that gave him the strength and resolve to save mankind and ultimately lay down his life in the process. In turn, his journey and the journey of those around him gave me the insight I needed to take my own grief and finally lay it to rest. Persona 4 deals with themes of truth and self-identity, two things teenagers find themselves clashing with quite often. Each character is on their own personal journey to figure out who they really are or what they really want. Yukiko has to come to terms with how she feels about taking on the family business. Kanji has to come to terms with his budding sexuality and the unfortunate stigmas that come with it. And Naoto has to come to terms with the discrepancy between her gender identity and the effect that would have on her image and career as a rising detective, just to name a few. Even the game's incredibly catchy song, Pursuing My True Self, lends itself to the theme of the game. All throughout the game, we see a fog shrouding the town of Inaba, symbolic of mankind's tendency to see only what they want to, ignoring the truth in favor of illusions or falsehoods. In the true ending of the game, we confront Izanami, the true hand behind all the events that transpired from the moment the protagonist arrived in Inaba. It was her goal to use the fog as a way of merging the world inside the Midnight Channel with the real world, effectively shrouding the world in fog, or lies, if you will. After a long, hard-fought battle against the goddess, the protagonist, through the bonds he's formed, stands tall and defeats Izanami in one of the single coolest moments I've ever seen in a JRPG.
God, he's so goddamn cool!
He defeats her with myriad truths, an amalgamation of the truths, lessons, and sense of unobstructed identity he and his friends have obtained over the course of their year of friendship. Their friendship is strong enough to overcome the will of all humanity that called out to Izanami in the first place, and they usher in a new era of possibility for mankind. The characters of Persona 4 embody the phrase, "If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together." I struggled with my sense of self for a long time. I just didn't know where to even begin sorting it out. Persona 4 gave me a starting point. The idea to truly look inward at my experiences and my relationships to figure out who I was and where I was even going. Self-identity and truth in one's own path isn't something anyone can determine for you. It's a road you have to walk yourself, but one you don't have to walk alone. My entire identity at the time was based solely on what others around me expected me to be or to do. It was like someone else painted a mask, forced me to wear it, and then convinced us both that it was who I really was. We see what we want to, and for the longest time, I chose to believe that I had decided my own identity when I was tailoring it to the needs or wants of others the entire time. I joined clubs I hated, applied to schools I didn't even want to go to, hung out with and did favors for people I didn't even like, all because the alternative was being by myself and having to build a new identity from scratch. We all face stigmas in some way, whether it's your sexual or romantic identity, your gender, your religious beliefs, your heritage, or even your financial situation. We all have expectations shackled to us from people we love or respect. There are all these external forces telling you who you need to be to fit in, but it's up to you to stand tall and tell the entire world to go fuck itself.
Wake up, get up there. Raise your voice, I guess like yours. Figure out your fire. Why does nobody want you?
Persona 5 tackles noticeably darker and down-to-earth themes than Persona 4, but its main focus is on rebellion and freedom. All throughout the game, you, your friends, and others are all dealing with situations in which rebellion is their only path to freedom. The protagonist was wrongfully accused of a crime, and the only path to freedom from that stigma and possibly clear his name is rebellion through his acts as the leader of the Phantom Thieves. Ann is being sexually harassed by the PE teacher, and her best friend is being physically abused anytime Ann spurns his advances, with their only path to freedom being rebellion through her acts as a Phantom Thief. Futaba is trapped in a cycle of despair, isolation, and self-loathing after she is blamed for the death of her mother. Her only path to freedom being rebellion against her own thoughts, emotions, and memories with the aid of the Phantom Thieves. And that's only including the people that are in our party. At the end of the game, you discover a prison at the bottom of Mementos. Mementos is a Tartarus-like place holding the shadows of every human, by the way. The humans' shadows in the prison are there willingly, foregoing their freedom and refusing to rebel against their captivity in favor of not having to make decisions for themselves. Everyone is tied up in their own cycle of torment that they can only punch through by going against what others, or even they themselves, think. Sometimes it takes going against the norm and making unpopular choices in order to free yourself from a situation that's holding you down or harming you. It takes putting yourself in a position where you could be vulnerable to stand up against an injustice, even if it sometimes means standing by yourself. Unlike Persona 3 and 4, I played Persona 5 within the last 6 months of this video, well into my adult life, so it was far easier for me to pick up and resonate with. I could tell where I was headed just from the chorus of the game's complete bop of a song.
Wake up, get up there. Raise your voice, I guess like yours. Feed your anger a fire. Why does nobody want you? Just imagine you're out there. Swatting lights in a maker. Can't move fast with a breaker. If you hold on, life will change.
To me, the most important line in the chorus is, "If you hold on, life won't change." Change is sometimes difficult, sometimes it's painful, sometimes it's terrifying, but oftentimes to get somewhere new or get away from something toxic, change is necessary. Holding on to a situation because it's familiar to you isn't always what's best, and to realize that, sometimes we need to stand face to face with our own shadows. Even as an adult, the concept of rebellion and freedom is incredibly relevant. Unfortunately, in today's society, our acts of rebellion are more and more frequently becoming our only way to retain the freedoms we've enjoyed or secure new ones. Freedom of expression, freedom of choice, freedom to love whoever we choose, a right to an open and free internet, yes, that is important, freedom from injustice, all of that. The act of rebellion is rarely easy, especially if what you're after is worth obtaining. I myself am in search of my own metaphorical freedoms, and Persona 5 helped me realize that it's okay to struggle with that. It's okay to make mistakes, stagger, and fall. But we can take it beyond just the scope of individual victims. Persona 5 sheds a bright light on the way society handles crime and punishment. Unfortunately, we live in a world where things like fame, money, and status can prevent individuals from facing justice. The use of these attributes often allows too many individuals to completely circumvent the justice system or go entirely unnoticed. Kamoshida was physically abusive to his students, and while it's part of the story that he had a habit of sexually harassing his female students, it is heavily implied that there were also acts of sexual abuse. It's also implied that other teachers and parents are aware of allegations of misconduct, but choose to turn a blind eye because he's the school's star coach. Madarame used his fame and influence as a respected and critically successful artist to coerce his pupils into handing over their original works, likely leveraging their careers as artists against them. Kaneshiro, a mob boss, basically made his living on tricking students into accidentally doing something illegal before using that act into blackmailing ridiculous amounts of money out of them. He's not above using threats against loved ones, as he mentions during your first meeting with him. That ability to put meaningful threats out into the world because of the kind of shady business he sits atop keeps him out of the clutches of the police. Okumura is the CEO of a food company that purposely overworks and underpays many of its employees to build the money necessary to shift into the political landscape. As the CEO, he's basically untouchable by those getting the worst treatment. He even goes so far as to arrange a marriage between his daughter and the son of someone else to build more political favor. His exchange of money for status keeps him divorced from the consequences of his actions. Then there's Shido, the embodiment of all three traits. He has a recognizable face, granting him some fame, if even on a region-specific level. He has the money to fund his personal endeavors because of his status as a high-profile member of the Japanese Diet pursuing the mantle of Japanese Prime Minister. His unprecedented station and affiliations allow him to do all the wicked things he wants over the course of the game, while not only keeping tabs on anything that could bring consequences down on him, but actively pulling the strings. On some level, each villain's behavior or motivations are tied to their fame, wealth, or status. It only takes a quick Google search to find real-world parallels of people that either skirt justice entirely or receive a mere slap on the wrist. The Phantom Thieves represent the spirit of the individual calling out for justice. It's why gaining the favor of the public matters so much to the story. because it's the people that need to hold those in power responsible for their actions. The Phantom Thieves just follow through on that desire. With the way social media works, we more and more find ourselves hearing the individuals, the voices no one typically listens to, calling out for action when it's necessary. I don't mean those that incite mob mentality for likes or clicks or just because they hate someone else. When people see wrongdoing these days, it's become almost second nature for us to draw attention to it, especially when it comes to those who put themselves on pedestals above us. As more people join in, we eventually force those in power to listen to us. In that way, we're all the Phantom Thieves. Let's just make sure we keep fighting the good fight, and not fighting every fight.
Hi everyone, I'm Katie from Take Your Time Gaming. When I heard SaturnCycle was doing a video thesis on the Persona series, I jumped on board immediately. I've been a Persona fan since the original Persona 3 released on the PS2, and it remains today one of my very favorite video game series. In fact, the only series I enjoy even more is its big brother, Shin Megami Tensei. So, what makes Persona so dear to my heart? Clearly, it's because of the stories these games tell. The plots in the Persona series are centered around themes of self-sacrifice, loyalty, self-acceptance, and the strength that stems through relationships. All of these resonate very strongly with me, in part, I think, because of the dark atmosphere of the games. The themes are often quite optimistic, and they contrast sharply with the demonic ambiance and psychopathic villains. That just makes the heroic deeds of the cast stand out more, I think. Despite high school being quite far in my past, I don't mind the school setting in the Persona games. In fact, I really enjoy it. And I think it's because the combination of the everyday life, the mundane, combined with the saving the world quest, creates characters who are more well-rounded as people. It makes them real to me. Not only do I get to see my in-game friends summoning personas and kicking some deity butt, I also get to see them going out for coffees, taking exams, and struggling with real human issues. Characters in the Persona series are consistently on journeys of self-acceptance, and on that road we see people who are fighting to come to terms with their sexuality, with issues of jealousy, with what they're capable of and not capable of. I can't name another video game series that writes character growth as well as Persona. Not even close. Persona will always mean a lot to me, and I can't see myself ever growing tired of the games, despite the fact that I will continue to grow older and the cast will remain teenagers. And that's because good stories are good stories. The age of a cast isn't as important as the evolution they experience on their journeys, and growth and change are something that the Persona writers do so well. Anyway, thank you for listening, and a big thank you to Saturn for letting me contribute.
The journeys through Personas 3 through 5 were ones I wouldn't trade for anything. The experiences taught me so much about myself that I didn't realize I still needed to learn. Each iteration gave me a new hope to lean on. Hope that I could lead a good and meaningful life before death, even if it's only meaningful to a small handful of people. Hope that my own self-identity will lead me to all the truths I'm after, even when the world is shrouded in lies and fog. And hope that despite how much we all struggle, freedom from what binds us is never impossible with the support of those who love us the most and if we stand up for what's right. The Persona games are more than just your average JRPG romps through high school and saving the world. They're about the human condition and the many trials each and every one of us face in our daily lives. Even if you've never touched a Persona game, you've lived one. You've lived through the fire and flames of battles unique to your life and your social links. You've overcome obstacles that you likely thought once were insurmountable. If you're still fighting those battles, still searching for your truth or rebelling to snatch your freedom, all I can say is keep going. I'd like to bring this video to a close with one of my favorite quotes that, unsurprisingly, comes from a Persona game. Death is not a hunter unbeknownst to its prey. One is always aware that it lies in wait. Though life is merely a journey to the grave, it must not be undertaken without hope. Only then will the traveler's story live on, treasured by those who bid him farewell.